Tonight, as ISIS gains more ground in both Iraq and Syria, we will talk with a military analyst who has been there and ask him what can be done to stop them. Then Chris Christie, he's getting even more unhinged. New Jersey governor now asking people to apologize to him for Bridgegate. You can't make this stuff up. Should he be the one doing the apologizing instead? Also, the Cuomo administration is pointing the finger at Indian Point and is pushing to close down the nuclear power plant. But does it really even have a say in the matter? Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us. And we begin tonight with the battle against ISIS. That terrorist army has just taken yet another Iraqi town just days after seizing Ramadi. Ramadi, as you know, the provincial capital of the Anbar province, and more than 1,000 Americans, they died fighting in Anbar, so the loss of that city particularly painful. It is also strategically important. ISIS is rampaging and has reportedly murdered at least 500 people just in the past week. The Iraqi army has apparently given up the fight, and it's hightailed out of town. And thousands of residents, they're fleeing to avoid the murder and mayhem that has been a trademark of ISIS. And things, they're not much better in Syria. ISIS extending its reach into the ancient city of Palmyra, and Syrian troops loyal to Bashar Assad, they are fleeing. But the White House, they're fighting back against critics who are saying that the U.S. strategy against ISIS is failing. Here is Press Secretary Josh Ernst.
The thing is, we have to sort of decide what our approach to these issues is going to be. Are we going to light our hair on fire every time that there is a setback in the campaign against ISIL?
The administration's also been saying the recent advances by ISIS doesn't mean that they are winning and we are losing. But Senator McCain is one of several folks in Washington, none too happy about both what you heard from Mr. Ernst and also that strategy.
It's just mind-boggling that the president could keep saying, and his spokesperson and others in the administration could keep saying what they're saying, while thousands of people are being butchered, burning bodies in the streets, executions, beheadings.
Okay, so we've got a couple questions for the panel, including what are the consequences of this, and will more dominoes fall? And then later in the conversation, we'll get into what can, should, or we and others really do about it. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, joins us as always. Shelley Mayer, Democratic State Assemblywoman representing Yonkers. Mike Lyons, military analyst, retired captain in the U.S. Army who served in Iraq. And Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. And no shock, Mike, I'm going to you on this one. First, before we get into recourse, what we can, can't do, should, shouldn't do, talk about the landscape here and the significance of the gains that ISIS has made. Let's start in Iraq. Give a little bit of a map here of where they are and where they're going.
Well, let's start even higher than that, Rich. Bottom line is ISIS has got a global strategy right now, and they are executing on it almost perfectly. They control over 50% of the landmass inside of Syria. And then now look inside of Iraq now at 50% of what the Anbar province is, but also regions to the north of that. So they control a great amount of geography in both of those two large countries. However, when they have these victories in Ramadi, for example, the use of social media allows them to expand their reach 5- and 10-fold. They're expanding into Yemen. They're looking at situations inside of Libya. So they've got a plan, and they are executing on that strategy perfectly at this point, with really no coalition in line to stop them.
Okay, and guys, jump in wherever you want, but let's do the who. ISIS, as I understand in Iraq, about 3,000 native-born Iraqis and 22,000 foreign fighters. I can do the math here. We're not talking some overwhelming force. How are 25,000 ragtag guys, forget about how they're financed, it's not like they're elite Delta forces here or anything. How are these guys causing so much havoc? And you're part of the folks, you guys train some of these Iraqis. Where's the fight to protect their own country?
Yeah, you know what, Rich, you're right. It is a battle of numbers, but the bottom line is there are still not enough numbers on the coalition side to go on the offense from a strategic perspective.
Really?
And defeat them. No, there isn't. And there's more than just that. Now, these are fundamentally Sunni jihadists. ISIS are Sunni jihadists that are looking to create Shia-Sunni divide. They want to exhibit and they want to implement a certain level of the Muslim religion there that, from their perspective, is the right one. But they have more. There's only maybe 15,000, let's say, of Iraqi security forces total that are ready to try to defend that whole country. So from the Iraqi government's perspective, the Shia militias are the vanguard, the protectors of the Iraqi government. The U.S.-led coalition has been a complete failure.
Okay. So if they don't have enough boots on the ground to do something about this, and ISIS is making inroads, again, I don't get the appeal, even within Iraq or elsewhere, that people say, I want to join up with this group. Forget ideologies or whatever else. There's no, lasting trademark that what they leave behind is better than when they got there. So where is the appeal for this to be expanding, not just in Iraq, but throughout the greater Middle East?
Well, you take the leaders of the former Baathists that really control most of the senior military positions inside of ISIS, and you layer onto them the young, disenfranchised Arab individual in those cities. If you're a Sunni that doesn't trust the Shia-led Iraqi government, that's not gotten any defense from them, that doesn't see any help coming from them, and you sit there and you have to say, what's the lesser of these two evils, and you align yourself with ISIS. They come in and take over Ramadi. The first thing they do is they try to wipe out any last remnants of the government that's there, the police that's there. They start murdering civilians. They rain on terror. I mean, we've seen this movie before, the Nazis back in the early part of the 20th century. So their tactic is clear. This is what they do, and that's how they gain their appeal. It's a better game in town than what they're currently getting inside of Iraq.
Okay, there's two schools of thought as to these are temporary gains, don't panic, they'll take back Ramadi, this is a temporary setback, don't set your hair on fire here, versus, my gosh, look at the map here. They're expanding broader and broader, and if you thought we had unrest before in the Middle East, you're going to start multiplying this right now. Iran's not going to sit around quietly as this keeps going even forward. So looking at the map that their audience is right now, Mike, talk about where you see where we are now and where potentially we could be if ISIS goes unchecked.
So if you see those yellow areas, which what ISIS currently controls right now, and if you understand the geography of the Middle East, all of those cities line up along two major riverbanks, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And so to defeat them militarily, you've got to develop a strategy that literally starts in the south in Baghdad, works its way north and west, back up those two river valleys. I mean, this is biblical type warfare that happened back in the days of when the Bible was. I mean, Old Testament type stuff. So in order to be defeated, there's got to be a start, which is why the defeat in Ramadi was so bad. Because from a military perspective, that was ground that was already taken, already considered to be on the win side, and the fact that they've now got to go take that back means they're really starting over.
What did the Iraqi army do when ISIS was knocking on the door in Ramadi?
Well, so they're getting a little bit of a bad rap here in Ramadi, and as I've done a little bit more research, as it's turned out, they've fallen back to defensive positions, but ISIS has its eyes set on Ramadi for the past year and a half. Since they established the caliphate last year, coming up on that a year now in June, they've wanted Ramadi. They realized the strategic importance of Ramadi. So they've been probing it. They've been after it for that long period of time.
But the reports that I heard is that the Iraqi army just basically threw down their weapons, ran out of town.
It wasn't the same there as it was in other cities, as in Tikrit and as in Mosul. That's not to say that they still couldn't have fought. A lot of it just has to do with this confidence that they just don't know how to. I mean, again, I've been in Iraq. I've seen what that looks like when the military, I never understood. I think we talked about that before. I've never understood how when you're in you're in the country defending your country, you drop your weapon and you wouldn't defend. A U.S. Girl Scout platoon would defend the United States, right. let alone Marines or the infantry of the Army.
Beyond the Iraqi army, when we were in Iraq, when the U.S. was controlling portions of Iraq, we had the insurgency that was basically making life miserable for the U.S. Army everywhere.
Right.
Bombs, IUDs, roadside attacks, that sort of thing. Where is that against ISIS?
Well, so, Andrew, great point, because what's happening is we're fighting ISIS. The coalition is trying to fight ISIS conventionally and not fighting it like an insurgency. And this is what that surge was all about. And to fight an insurgency means you put more troops in the city. So you have to have 10, 15, 20,000 troops in the city.
Well, and that's where we're going to go to.
We don't have the numbers.
Right. And when we come back on the other side of the break, that all begs the question right now. If we've established that, we'll get into more, if this is a national security issue, forget about it in Iraq, but even broader than that, then do we have to re-examine our role when it comes to Iraq and potentially the broader Middle East all over again? We're going to get into that conversation, and as always in our conversation, we want you to be a part of it. So get involved, head over to Facebook and Twitter, and answer a question. And this is what we'll address as soon as we come back from the break. Should the U.S. put more troops once again on the ground in Iraq? All right, coming up next, we will look at why the world is always looking to us seemingly to handle problems like this. Why don't Arab states or some of our NATO allies step up and deal with this? But more importantly, is the cost of inaction worse than the cost of action, all as we approach Memorial Day? We'll get into all that after this.